and welcome to the Bring Me My Books podcast. I'm one of the hosts, Christy Kane, and instead of Travis, who is off getting ready for the Hope Words Writers Conference, I'm delighted to have one of our very first author of the very first book that we read, Amanda Held Opelt, with us. So Amanda, thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for reading my book. Like it really is such an honor. And I've loved the discussions that y'all have had. So,
well, thank you. Yeah. It was great. And we can get more into it, but it was honestly, it was a book that I think maybe people wouldn't have initially, if they weren't in if they were in the midst of grief, they may not have picked it up at the moment, but when they did, so much they resonated with it.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's what I hope the book is. I hope it's a book not just for people going through grief, but for people that are wanting to be supportive of friends that are walking through a hard season or wanting to be prepared for grief. I know I write about that a lot in the book, that I was so ill prepared for it. That's probably why I wrote the book, because it's like, even if things are going great for you right now, you might want to consider some of the things in here, because someday this will be you. You'll be living this story. So,
yeah. Well, let's just jump in. I want to talk about this book. I want to talk about lots of things, but I want to talk about this book at first. And so maybe for someone who hasn't read it, would you tell us a little bit about how it came about and what it's about?
Yeah. Well, I always say that this book came about because of the algorithm on my phone. Sometimes I feel like our phones know us better than we know ourselves. And somehow my phone had picked up on the fact that I was grieving. And what had happened is that in my mid-30s, I had just walked through this season of profound losses, kind of one after the other. My last living grandparent, who I was very close with, passed away quite suddenly. We were walking through a season of infertility and miscarriage. I had a really, I would say, difficult, probably traumatic experience on one of my deployments when I was working in an international aid organization. And then kind of the atom bomb that went off in my life was that my only sibling passed away very, very suddenly. And I was just kind of left as like a novice in my own life. Like I didn't even recognize who I was. I didn't know what my life was. It felt like things had been really reduced to shambles, and was just kind of trying to process and be strong and be all the things that you feel like you need to be, for your family who's also grieving. And, while I was trying to, muddle my way through it, my phone sent me an article on strange and historic grief rituals from the past and from all over the world.
Oh, wow.
And so I just read that article and I was like, this is fascinating. And that was the loose thread that I began to pull on. And I was like, well, that Irish keening, that sounds interesting. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. And Google came to my aid. I researched, Irish keening, and then I researched telling the bees, and then I researched, tolling the bell and all these strange practices. And then I started checking books out from the library. I'm pretty sure the librarian thinks that I'm a complete weirdo, because it's like you're checking out books called, the Victorian Book of the Dead and Death in Early Appalachia. It's like, who is this woman and what's she going through? But that's kind of, it was in that study of rituals that this kind of book, this book came to be. And that was also right around the time the pandemic hit. And so I thought to myself, I wonder if everything that I'm learning and processing could be helpful for those who are walking through this kind of tremendous grief that we're all collectively facing now.
Right.
And that's how the book came to be.
Yeah. Well, and then when people have asked me before they read it, like, well, tell me what it is. I know it's a book about grief.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it's kind of her story, but it's also kind of an explanation and a storytelling way of all these grief rituals. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, I would say it's part memoir, it's part history, it's part reflections on grief and the theology of suffering. But really what it is it uses these strange practices, 12. Did I do 12 chapters? I was originally going to do 10. So it's 12 chapters. 12 practices, historic grief rituals that are kind of the scaffolding by which I tell my story. So it's my story of grief, but it's told kind of with these rituals kind of guiding the journey.
Yeah.
And so if you're a history buff, I think you'd enjoy it. If you're interested in topics related to the theology of suffering, obviously my faith plays a big role in the way that the story is told. So those would be, I guess, the kind of people that the book would appeal to.
Yeah. Was there a particular practice that was super helpful for you?
I think I think Irish keening is really the reason why this book exists, because I found just the notion that to allow your raw emotions to be unleashed, to allow yourself to feel that level of pain and to feel it publicly, communally, that is actually healthy and therapeutic and an ancient time-tested practice.
Yeah.
That was kind of the light bulb moment of, oh, we aren't doing this right. This is not how we do this now.
Right.
And so I would say that's the one that if I've read the most books, if I've done the most research, it's probably on that one. And just partly because it's also a bit of an artistic grief ritual.
Yes.
It involves music. It involves kind of the composition of poetry and words. And so for that reason, I, as an artist, as a songwriter, as a words person, I think that was also really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And I have Scots Irish heritage, all of that. So that was part of the appeal for me on that one.
It's interesting to me as I was thinking and reading about these grief rituals that in some ways we think about moving forward in history that we're going to be getting better at things, particularly I think the human nature.
Yes.
And yet what you said the thought that was put into it, the artistry, all of that. And it seems like we have that's a way that we have gone backwards.
Yeah. I love that you bring that up, Christy. It's like the myth of progress that like we are just advancing as a society. We're learning more and more. And that's true in some areas, but we're also forgetting, I think, some core truths about humanity, some core practices, whether that's our connection to one another, our connection to the earth, our connection to the seasons, the reality of suffering. And we live with just this false idea that we can kind of control our lives now. And I understand why we have that perception, but we don't. No matter how many scientific advancements we have, medical advances, life is still really precarious. And to lose that deep, bone deep knowledge of that, I think is to what's the opposite of progress, like to degress or to regress. Yes, I think, and I think we've done that when it comes to our grieving.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I think that this book is helpful in that sense too. And here's a personal example when I think about it. So my husband is from Appalachian Mountains in Virginia.
Yeah.
And when we went back for a funeral, this has been several years ago, the people in that church were much more demonstrative with their grief, even during the middle of the funeral. Yeah. And I, who had grown up a little bit more in urban areas and things like that, I was sitting there thinking, what are they doing? Yeah. And there was that sense of, why don't they have kind of control over their self? Things like, why are they doing this? Yes. Yeah. And so as I read this, there were moments that I thought, I think we're the ones we're the ones that have gone backwards.
Yeah. Well, and we're sitting here in Bluefield, West Virginia. So when we talk about Appalachia, I think so much has been said about the way the mountains isolate the people of Appalachia to their detriment. You know what I mean? That it's the isolation of Appalachia that has led to kind of the beleaguered nature of Appalachians, right? But the reality is those mountains also preserve. They also help keep communities intact and traditions intact, and deep human knowledge and learned ancient wisdom is protected in many ways by the isolation. And so grief rituals have persisted throughout Appalachia much longer than they have in the rest of the country. And that's why so many of the rituals that I feature are Appalachian rituals, or, in part because those are my people, but also because they stuck around for longer. That's true. So we can study them,
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, the book is out there. We talked a little bit about this before we started the podcast, but the book is out there. Yeah. And when you think about whether it's a book club like ours that is more spread out, it's almost like a virtual book club. Yeah. Or it's a few friends meeting in a house. Are there things that you wish that you could say to those people now that they've read your book or in the process of reading your book? Yeah.
Well, I think every author has like whole sections they wish they could rewrite, grammatical errors they could fix, or, the thing about a book is that it's in print and print is permanent. And so it's a really frightening thing. Like, I know a lot of people really aspire to be an author or publish a book. And I am so grateful for the privilege of it. But I think it's also like, it's really heavy to know that your words are going to be out there permanently. Yeah. And even if you get to a second edition, there's still going to be these prints, like these copies sitting on somebody's shelf somewhere.
That's right.
So, but I think if I could say to anybody anything, is that just, this is not a prescriptive book at all. And it's not meant to be kind of a robust solution on here's how we now completely rethink how we do grief. And here's the 10-step, plan for overhauling our grief practices in modern America. This is really just meant to be a companion for your journey of grief, and every journey is gonna meander in different ways. Yeah. And so what makes sense to me in my grief might not make sense to you. I think it's Jan Richardson who says grief is piercingly particular. It's very particular to everybody's story. Yes. And so this may resonate with you. Not everything will. Different people will like different chapters and different aspects of it. And that's totally okay.
Yeah. And I think that's true for the people that I've talked to, whether they have experienced grief themselves, in a sense, we probably all experience grief, but very closely, or not. There were rituals that they identified with, or they could, kind of wish they could enter into that, or they just found really intriguing, connected to them in some way. Yeah. And I would say, I think when we connected a little bit on Instagram, I think I told you this, but the friend, I first heard about this book from one of my very best friends who lost her husband. And she has still, like, reading books has still been difficult for her. But this was the one book she was like, you and your husband, because my husband was one of her husband's best friends. And so, it hit close to home for both of us. She was like, this is the book that you guys should read. And I think some of it was that you weren't trying to tell her how to grieve. You weren't telling her, like you said, the steps to do it, but you were sharing your story. And then you were kind of talking about these are ways different people have done this in the past. And so I feel like it's doing that.
I'm honored to hear that it was helpful to her. And I know how hard it was. I didn't want to touch a grief book in the first year after my sister died. I was like, I want to think about, I was reading a lot of books about American Revolutionary War history, just to kind of get my head out of that sad space. But eventually I was ready, and I was looking for grief books that, again, weren't going to be prescriptive, but were just going to be companionship. And it was harder to find than I thought. And I guess that was another reason I felt a need to write the book, because I was like, we need more gentle guides, I think, than real prescriptive stuff.
Yeah. So. And I'm sure that well, at least I would think I've written curriculum and articles. I have not written anything like this, but sometimes when you begin to create something, for me, there's always this, like, do we need another fill in the blank? Do we need another?
Totally.
But then I think, but then you read something like this and you're like, I'm so glad you didn't think, I'm so glad that you didn't stop and say, well, there are enough grief books out there, because like I said, like, it's really been a help. And I think that should be an encouragement to people who are creating and things like that. Anyway, go ahead and write the book, or write the song, or do the thing and share what it is.
Because you may be writing it from a completely different vantage point than anybody else. Maybe this book has been written a million times, but has it been written from your shoes? Has it been written from your vantage point? And but my agent and I had a real serious conversation about that, which was like, well, do we need one more book about grief? She's like, I swore I'd never represent a book about grief, because there's so many out there, and it's like, but I think part of it too is just the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were watching our rituals disappear before our eyes there, because we could no longer do funerals, we couldn't do visitations, we couldn't. So I think kind of the bereavement of the rituals themselves was quite, I think, a topic that needed to be addressed and needed to be out in the open.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, even the people who didn't get to be with their loved ones as they were dying. There was so much different, hard and different about that.
Yeah, well, and part of my passion in writing this was like, whenever we can, whenever it's safe to do so, bring the rituals back. Because it is often like a catastrophic event in world history, like the bubonic plague of the 1340s. That's the reason why so many rituals went away. Too many people were dying, extenuating circumstances. Right. I was like, COVID cannot be the reason why we lose our funerals too. Yes. Like let's keep at least the remaining rituals that we have. So that was kind of me kind of waving, like the red flag of like, everyone, like, let's remember to bring back our rituals when we're able to, once COVID winds down. So
I have one more question about the book, and then we'll go to a break.
Sure.
And then I've got a couple other questions that I want to discuss. But when I think about rituals and what you just said about like bring the rituals back, hold on to them. For me, it's kind of like a liturgy in a church.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, that helps me to have something to hold on to.
Totally.
Would that be a good way to describe rituals?
Yeah. I think so. I think there's a lot of conversation in the academic world of what exactly is a ritual. And we use the word ritual really loosely. It's like, I have my morning skincare rituals and my coffee rituals. And I'm a little bit of maybe a purist that thinks that rituals are really the kind of things that can only be done communally, where there's a community of people saying, this is the meaning behind this embodied practice. And we're going to hold that meaning as sacred.
Yeah.
But I think the church is in a great position to stand as a preserver of rituals. It has traditionally. It's also served as a destroyer of rituals.
True.
I write about that a little bit in the book, that there were some that they found questionable because they felt that perhaps there was pagan influence or there was bad theology assigned to it. And unfortunately, when they did away with those types of rituals, they didn't replace them with others.
Yeah.
But I think that the church is one of our few remaining kind of social communal gathering places where people come together from all walks of society. And so that is my hope, that like, much like they preserve the ancient liturgies of prayer and scripture and worship and communion, the Eucharist, the Lord's table, that these rituals of grief would be a place, the church could be a place where they're practiced.
Yeah. Great. Well, we're going to take a break for our sponsors, and then we'll be right back with Amanda. Thanks.
Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year, and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope. LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you.
Welcome back to the Bring Me My Books podcast, and I'm here with author Amanda Held Opelt, and we've been talking about the book it was our first book, A Hole in the World. But I wanted to ask you a couple other questions, because Amanda, you're not just an author, or at least you're not just a book author. I'll put it that way. So tell us a little bit about the other things that you do and how you describe yourself.
Yeah. Well, right now I'm like doing the hardcore mom thing, and I'm spending a lot of time at home. I still work a little bit during the week, but I spend most of my time with my kids, and that's a really sweet season, and it's a maddening season, and it's chaotic season, and it's all those things. But yeah, I spent the last 15 years before I became an author working in social services and nonprofit humanitarian aid work. So I always tell people I wasn't a proper aid worker. I was like providing staff care protocols for actual aid workers. Okay. So I didn't save anybody's life. I always say that, but I did have the opportunity to travel
directly.
Yeah, there we go. I was helping people maybe put on their oxygen masks so that they could put the oxygen mask on other people. But yeah, I got to travel all over the world and kind of see suffering with my own, like really profound devastation all over the world, and meet some of the incredible people that are responding to those disasters. And that has been very deeply formative for me. And so but now I I'm got a much more slower pace. Unless you count 5-year-old and the 3-year-old, they don't keep you at too slow of a pace.
That's
but
right.
It's a bit slower of a pace. And live with my husband and 2 little girls in the mountains of Boone, North Carolina, and I found like a great community there. I'm still really involved in my church. I preach about once a month. We have a team teaching approach to church, and so I preach about once a month, lead worship, and I'm also a songwriter too. That was kind of my primary art form that I kind of started with all those years back, and so to make the shift from songwriting to long form writing was a haul to kind of like learn a new way of using words. Like it took me a long time to kind of settle into it, such that I was almost like, I wonder if they can destroy my book contract, because I don't know if this is working. I'm not sure I can do this, but I made my way through it slowly but surely and figured out how to make it work. But it's a different approach for sure to using words.
Does one come more easily than the other?
I think songwriting is just kind of my mother tongue, and it seems to come the easiest to me. And you can cover up a multitude of inadequate words with a really beautiful melody, and I really like that. You're much more exposed, it feels like, in kind of the written word on page. But I've really enjoyed, I always felt like with songwriting, there was only so much you can say because you're kind of limited in terms of your word count. And so to kind of be able to have, 80,000 words, 70,000 words to say what you really want to say about a topic is a lot of fun. And I love the research part of writing books. So yeah.
Well, speaking of writing books and writing music too, who would you say, or what have been big influences for you?
Yeah. It's funny. I don't read a ton of books within my own genre. And what I mean by that is like, I don't read a ton of like memoirs or just like reflect. I do. But I love to dive headfirst into like a history book. That's kind of my favorite thing to do. In fact, I just finished this, this book called Appalachia on Our Mind by, I think it's Henry Shapiro. I know his last name is Shapiro. And it's just like this whole history of the stereotype of the Appalachian hillbilly. And I just like ate it up. Like it was just fascinating to me. And so those are the kind of books that I try to spend time in, and just, I love learning new things. And so, I don't read as many books from the kind of more memoir category, but when I do, I often read Hannah Anderson. I'm a huge fan of hers and excited to see her again here at Hope Words here in a few hours, probably. I've really loved the work of Rachel Murray Kong. She's another North Carolina writer. Kendall Vanderslice is another North Carolina writer. People that are writing about kind of these embodied ways of living out their faith. Hannah leans a lot on nature as a metaphor. Kendall Vanderslice leans a lot on bread as a storytelling mechanism. Rachel Murray Kong talks a lot about the arts and, artistic expression as a way of kind of living this embodied faith life. And so those are the folks that when I'm going to read like a memoir, they're or kind of a more spiritual theological reflection, those are the folks that I'm turning to.
Okay, that's great. Well, we always end our podcast, thankfully that it was really nice that you knew. I'll say that.
I love your podcast.
That's great. That was really nice.
Discussions about books are great, and I'm looking forward to the next book y'all are reading. It's great what you're doing. So
it's been fun, and I'm so glad that Travis came along for the ride. I knew when we were talking about doing a books podcast, I was like, I don't know if he's too busy, but I would really love to do this with Travis. So that's been fun. But so we took the name. And actually, he's the one, he kind of gave us the name. And it's at the time when Paul is telling Timothy, hey, when you come, can you bring my cloak and my books? And so you and I have talked a little bit about what that means. But do you have a book or a cloak that has been pretty important for you right now that you would share with us?
My book and my cloak are related. I think right now the book that I'm taking on my trip, because I'm about to go on another trip after I leave Bluefield, I've brought along a book called The Land by Walter Brueggemann. And it's a whole theology of the land and scripture. That's awesome. And I'm really excited to dive in deeper. I'm in chapter 1 now, and it's great. And my cloak is that I have been able to now walk the land finally, that it is becoming warmer outside. And so I've started resuming my evening walks after dinner. It's light outside, it's getting warmer, the flowers are blooming. And so being able to just walk across the hills in the evenings has been kind of a way to calm my mind and reconnect with the Lord and calm my spirit. So that's my cloak right now.
That's good. That's really good. And one of the things I love about this community is I'll hear about books that, I feel like working in the books industry and then doing this podcast, I know a lot, but the one that the land, it was not on my radar. It sounds like something I would love. So
I think it's a bit like he wrote it a while ago, so it's not been on the radar recently. But I was particularly interested in the theology of land in Scripture, and so I Googled. It's like, we got to read Walter Brueggemann's. I'm like, of course. Yeah. So awesome. I'm excited to jump into it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Christy, thank you. And thank you so much for reading my book. I want to thank all your listeners for the ones that have read and the comments that they've made. It does an author's heart so good to know that their words are meeting people in a meaningful way. It's lonely work to write a book.
I'm sure.
And so to get that kind of feedback is really ministers to me. So thank you so much.
Well, it was great. And I'm really grateful that that's how we started. Like I said, you and I talked about this too.
It was a bold choice.
Like, we're going to start off with a book about grief. But it really did. I think it really did resonate with people. So thank you. So. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for being part of the Bring Me My Books community. We're so grateful that you listen in or that you read along with us and just help us think about the books that we're reading, the important books, and give us ideas and all that. But until next time, we'll see you soon. Thanks.